How they caught famous serial killers, Part 1, Ted Bundy. Bundy's thing was to use his charm, speaking skills, and educated demeanor to lure people into his trap. At times he would put his arm in a sling or walk on crutches to give his victims a false sense of security. You would think, how harmful can a man be in crutches, dressed up in a suit, and even driving a cute car? That's why he was so hard to catch, because he just didn't fit the profile of a serial killer, who did disgusting things to people the moment they died and after. Probably should have been caught much earlier than he was. After all, when young women went out and never came back, witnesses will come forth and say they seen a man lurking around, a man with one arm in a sling, a man that drove a VW Bug. 22-year-old Brenda Carroll Ball was last seen talking to a guy in a car park who had brown hair and his arm in a sling. Soon after, Susan Elaine Rancourt went missing, never to return. After this, two people came forward about being approached by a man who had his arm in a sling, who asked him for help putting books into his car, VW Beetle that he drives. That right there was the #1 method that he used. And on June 11, 1974, University of Washington student Georgia Ann Hawkins went missing, and her body would never be found. So that she had been with her boyfriend and left after midnight. Walking back to her sorority house, she ran into a friend driving past in a car. Then they started talking, and witnesses will come forth saying that they seen a man lurking around in the alleyway and with his arm in a sling. More abductions began to happen, more murders, even more attempted abductions. Disappearances began to get reported in the media. Here's where things started to get crazy. A woman named Elizabeth Clifford, who used to date Ted Bundy back in the day, put two and two together. At this point in time, they were still dating. Not only called the King County cops, tell them that she thought she had been dating the killer, it also called the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office and told them the exact same thing. Like I said, they were still dating at this time, but she didn't mention anything about the cause. To her, the sketcher looked like Bundy, the car was Bundy's. The murders following him around was too much of a coincidence. Bundy then started killing in Colorado. Not really much changed. Death by blood force trauma, sometimes strangulation, bodies dumped, mutilated, sometimes wearing clothes that weren't theirs. 1975 had then came to an end. There were more victims, some whose bodies were never found. 1976 was another bloody year. Police discovered a new toy, a computer, and a database. Found out that they can put in info about the murder, compare that to the data already in the computer system. Thousands of names were in the database, but only 25 names matched the crime. One of the names was Ted Bundy's. Moving forward to 1978, Ted Bundy was stopped by a police officer. During questioning, he kicked the cop's legs and made a run for it. The cop fired warning shots, but he kept running. The cop tackled him. Despite Bundy's best efforts, he couldn't get the gun from the cop. The cop didn't know at the time who he had in his possession. CIA's most wanted. In the car, Bundy told the cop, "I wish you had killed me." Questioning, he confessed to 30 murders. There could have been many more. January 24, 1989, age 42, Bundy took his final breaths in the electric chair. He said, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." Let me know if y'all want to part 2 in the comments. How they caught famous serial killers, Part 2, John Wayne Gacy. He said that he was a pillar of the community. Friendly neighbors watched from their windows as he shoveled snow for the elderly. He became Pogo the Clown for the local children. He fathered his tricks and happily received a balloon for being a good boy or girl. Little did they know that he was a devil in disguise. He usually performed at children's hospitals and charitable events. This Pogo the Clown. Let's keep going on to what I was saying. Close friend to politicians and professionals. When the mask was finally removed from the sadistic killer, society was shaken to its very core. John Wayne Gacy was a man who once said in custody, and I quote, "Taking 3.5 hours of truth serum, sodium amytal, the maximum amount I could have, shows I have no knowledge of the crime whatsoever." That's strange because his crimes were most certainly memorable. When Gacy wasn't making kids laugh at his tricks, he did one-on-one shows at his house. It involved a young man to try wearing a pair of handcuffs and get out of them. Seeing that Gacy was already a respectable member of the local community, the victim gladly slipped his hands into the cuffs with no hesitation. His captor would then fasten a noose around his neck, pulling it tighter in increments. This was about the time where the victim knew that there was no trick, that Gacy was certainly no pillar of the community. Let's go back to the start, how it all began. Like most serial killers in the making, John Wayne Gacy had a troubled upbringing. He stuffed his trauma down in the far reaches of his brain. Wouldn't be long before his horrifying past resurfaced in new ways when he grew up. Gacy was an outcast as a young boy. Had a father who was quick to reprimand him as a child. He was powerless. It doesn't often bode well for an adult in the making. At the age of 18, it looked as though that he was doing alright. On this time, he was an assistant precinct captain for a local Democratic Party politician. It seemed like young Gacy was becoming a respectable young man. Everything he did was never good enough for his dad. No matter what he did, his father would always call him homophobic slurs. Yes, he was homosexual, which is why he targeted mostly young men. Around this time, he had to hold in his sexual urges. Let's fast forward a little bit. He ended up moving away from his dad. Around this time, he was 36 years old. This guy was known to almost everyone in the community. 3 different cities he had been named Man of the Year, but no one ever suspected the guy to be a serial killer. A few years later, be police cars sent outside his house. A growing suspicion of him being the actual reason that people had been gone missing. Gacy lost his patient, went out to the surveillance vehicle, told the cops to come inside, have a coffee. Look around, there's nothing to see. The neighbors wondered why they were harassing poor Mr. Gacy. Little did they know, at this point in time, he had already killed 30 people. Cops went in his house to use a bathroom. They flushed the toilet. There was something wrong. It wasn't physical, but it was a smell that every detective knows well. Death. He had been killing for a while he was living with his second wife. When she had left the house, he lured young men back to his house on the promise of booze and weed. He would often play his clown game with them, slowly strangle them. His wife would often complain about the smell, but he would always blame it on dead rats. The guy ended up escaping from the cuffs, getting to the police. They then arrested Gacy. Confessed to his crimes in live interviews. Let me know if y'all want How They Caught Famous Serial Killers, Part 3, Ed Gein. Ed was truly unique in his depravity, and that's why he inspired movies such as Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Silence of the Lambs. If there's one movie that fits Ed's life like a glove, it's Psycho. The real question is, how did he get away with his crimes for such a long time? And anyone in that small town, I wonder if there was anything a little bit strange about the man? His entire house was made from things from human body parts. To do that, he needed quite the stock of bodies. But the question still remains, how did he get the bodies? And how did he do it without any local cops noticing? But first, let's go back in time to young Ed and how it all began. How did a young boy become such a monster? A guy who would soon be known as the Butcher of Plainfield. Edward Theodore Gein was born August 27, 1906, in a place called La Crosse County in the state of Wisconsin. He was raised alongside with his brother Henry. Augusta, Ed's mom, is someone you might call a controlling matriarch. She wasn't too happy with her life, so she ended up moving her family across the country to Plainfield, where they would work on an isolated farm, barely coming in contact with any other people. Ed and his brother Henry both went to the local school. The teachers always thought that there was something wrong with the boys. Ed had the habit of just laughing out loud for no good reason. Ed and his brother didn't really have any friends, and if they did have friends, his mom would soon put a stop to the relationship. I'm pretty sure y'all understand how his childhood went, but let's fast forward to later on in his life. Now let me catch y'all up. When Ed was 34, his dad died. A few years later after that, his brother Henry died fighting a fire, which left him to live with his mom, who later died in 1945. He had then become obsessed with sex, dismemberment, and human experiments conducted by the Nazis at concentration camps. At this point in time, Ed is living all alone. What the locals in the village didn't know is that Ed had lost his head. The death of his mom really traumatized him to the point that he was dangerously psychotic. Ed had become deranged and there was no going back. We don't know the exact time when Ed started playing around with corpses, but it was thought to be around the late 40s and early 50s when he started grave digging and killing. Sometimes he would wait till the body has been buried, sneak off to the graveyard in the middle of the night and exhume the corpse, basically just digging it up. Ed is now referred to as a necrophiliac serial killer, which means he gratified himself sexually with the bodies before he started making things from them. He would later use some body parts to make things around the house. He was later brought in for questioning after they seen what he had in his house. At first, Ed was reluctant to open up to the investigators, but the longer he stayed there, the more he talked. They sat there and listened as he explained the thing he liked to do the most. Put on his tan-skin suit, don one of his face masks, put the female sex organs over the male sex organs, and run around in the garden, especially when it was a full moon. They then raided Ed's house, found bodies, genitals, organs, anything you could find in your body basically. Ed ended up dying from lung cancer in 1984.